On the 1st of November 1957, the body of Maria Rosalia Auguste Nitribitt, known as Rosemarie, was found. She had been murdered and her body had a laceration on her head and strangulation marks and a stocking around her neck. The body was found in her apartment in Frankfurt am Main at Stiftstraße 36 by the cleaning lady. The white poodle of the victim, called Joe, was whimpering by the side of the body. Around 18,000 marks were believed to be missing from the apartment, but expensive items of property were still there. According to the post-mortem, her death had occurred 20 to 30 hours earlier. The case of Rosemarie Nitribitt is well known in Germany. There have been books and several films on the subject. There's also a musical called The Girl Rosemarie. Here's a book that was brought out for the 50th anniversary of the murder in 2007. Rosemarie Nitribitt was born on the 1st of February 1933 in Dusseldorf. She worked as a high-class prostitute, and during the police investigation it was suggested that she had had contact with a number of important personalities from the world of both business and politics. Rosemarie was the child of a single mother. She probably never knew her father, a worker from Dusseldorf who refused to pay child support. She grew up in poverty in Rattingen and Dusseldorf, living with two half-sisters and her mother, that is to say, when her mother wasn't in prison. When her mother was in prison in 1938, Rosemarie was placed in a children's home in Eschweiler. There she proved to be a problem child and who was difficult to educate. She ran away several times. She was placed with Anna Maria and Nicholas Elson, a foster family in Niedermedig, a village to the east of Koblenz. Here, at the age of 11 in 1944, she was raped by an 18-year-old from the neighbourhood, who was then drafted into the Wehrmacht shortly afterwards. The crime was never reported to the authorities and the perpetrator was never brought to justice, even though everyone in the village knew who he was. As an adolescent, she earned her first money through prostitution. There were plenty of Allied occupation troops who provided a market for her services. Later she moved to Koblenz, then to Frankfurt am Main, where she worked, still a minor, as a waitress and a model, but soon returned to work as a prostitute. She was arrested. This is a photograph from the Frankfurt police. She was sent to a reformatory from which she fled. From April 1952 to April 1953, Rosemarie Nitribitt was housed at the Brauweiler Abbey near Pulheim, which was used for people with mental and addiction problems. She was so problematic for the staff that she was declared an adult early, that is to say, before she was 21, so that she could be released. On release, she changed. She made a great effort to conceal her humble origins. In order not to attract attention in society through her lack of education, she learned English and French and took courses in good manners. This, obviously, would help her in her chosen profession. In 1954, a client gave her an Opel Capitan. This is what the car looked like. It is not really what one might call a vehicle for a young lady. However, it was very unusual for any young people to possess cars at the time, particularly a vehicle as expensive as this. This photograph was taken by a professional photographer and she posed for it with the Opel Capitan. Other clients invited her on holiday to the Mediterranean. According to personal records left behind and researched by the Frankfurt Criminal Police, Rosemarie Nitribitt earned around 80,000 marks in 1957. That would be well over €250,000 in today's money. In the summer of 1956, she bought a Mercedes-Benz 190 SL. It was black with red leather seats. This made her a highly visible person in Frankfurt. This photograph shows the image she sought to display, the car and the poodle called Joe, representing a sort of sophistication that would appeal to the high-end customers she sought. The car disappeared after her death. This photograph was taken privately just before her death, and here we can see the very last photograph of her, relaxing at home and taken without her knowledge. The murder got a lot of publicity at the time. Quick went as far as to offer a reward of 50,000 marks for information leading to the capture of the murderer. It then purchased the right for the main suspect's story in a multi-part expose. Quick was based in Munich and founded in 1948. It was undoubtedly a world leader in its format, offering big pictures and not much text. Indeed, its corporate information stated that its target market was the hurried reader. It went out of business in 1992, finding it difficult to compete with the massive television channels that then appeared for advertising clients. Hitler's secretary, Traudl Junge, worked for the company for many years. The officers investigated several suspects, some of them very prominent business people in West Germany. If you are a regular viewer to this channel, you will have seen this photograph before, but in much different circumstances. Harold Quandt was the son of the first husband of Magda Goebbels, Herbert Quandt. He had major business interests inherited from his father and sat on the board of a variety of companies. Harold von Berlin und Halbach was the younger brother of Alfred Krupp von Berlin und Halbach of the Krupp family, who had been tried at Nuremberg. Ernst Wilhelm Sachs and his younger brother Gunther Sachs were heirs to the Opel Group. Gunther Sachs was said to be the prototype of the gentleman playboy with his extroverted lifestyle. Alleged clients in the world of politics included the later Federal Chancellor Kurt-Georg Kiesinger and the then Federal Minister of Transport Hans-Christoph Seebohm. I need to point out that I'm repeating from the scandal sheets of the time. Much of this may have been completely exaggerated or indeed untrue in the subsequent publicity. The detective Alfred Kalk, who was dealing with the case, said of the notebook in which Nitribitt recorded her contacts, there were names in the book, but they were not from the big world of the powerful and rich, but rather just ordinary citizens. The most high-profile person was a bank director from Bad Homburg. Nitribitt had written down a total of 60 names in her 1957 pocket calendar. The owner of a grocery store in Munich was shadowed and interrogated several times in December 1958 because Nitribitt had written his name together with the code words Dusseldorf and Munich in the pocket calendar. In January 1959, the suspect was informed that the investigation against him had been discontinued. 12 hours later, he suffered a fatal heart attack. Hardly explainable investigative errors by the Frankfurt Criminal Investigation Department fueled the suspicion of a planned cover-up. Some files disappeared without a trace, and the officers made numerous mistakes. For years afterwards, there was speculation that explosive files and interrogation records had been deliberately hidden in order to protect prominent clients and suspects from politics and business. In 2013, however, archivists from the Frankfurt police came across the documents in their archives that had been thought to be lost. The case was kept on file as active until 1972 and then allegedly forgotten in the archives of the Frankfurt police after the case was closed. Given the publicity surrounding the case, this indeed is suspicious. The rediscovery included parts of the 24-volume investigation files that were long thought to be lost. They included 4 volumes of interrogations, Rosemarie Nitribitt's notebook, identification photos of suspects, as well as 19 love letters, postcards and poems by Harold von Berlin und Halbach. The latter is relevant to this story as the testimony of Harold von Berlin und Halbach now came to light, and he was clearly a major suspect. Nitribitt's marketing strategy was to park her vehicle near upscale hotels and then play loud music whenever a prospect appeared. The idea was somehow to get her noticed by the prospect. In the case of Harold von Berlin und Halbach, this worked, and they struck up a conversation. Over the next 6 months, Harold von Berlin met Nitribitt around 10 times in her apartment, according to the interrogation protocol. During the murder investigation, the police investigators found his fingerprints on an opened bottle of red wine at the crime scene. Berlin stated that he'd been in Essen on the days in question, that is to say between the 28th and 31st of October 1957. The officers questioned several employees of Berlin's residence in Bredene and finally settled for an alibi that came from the housekeeper of his recently deceased mother, Bertha. Apparently asked whether Berlin could have driven to Frankfurt unnoticed at night, she said, "After his mother's death, I felt responsible for Mr. von Berlin und Halbach and would feel it if he were absent for a longer period of time." Bertha Krupp von Bohlen und Halbacher died at the age of 71 on the 21st of September 1957. The main suspect was a friend of Nitribitt's, Heinz Christian Pohlmann, who was born in Wuppertal in 1922. He'd spent the part of the war in the military and then was in a US POW camp. Later he'd gone into sales. He had a rather extravagant lifestyle too. He'd known Rosemarie Nitribitt for around 3 years and she'd given him a key to the apartment. He had had financial problems due to losing his job, but after the death of Nitribitt, suddenly he had a large quantity of cash in his possession, the presence of which he was unable to explain, other than to say it was due to crime. Some of the money was due to fraud, some of it had been stolen. Blood was found on his trousers, which he claimed was from a skin condition. A witness had seen him driving very fast near the murder scene at the time the police stated that the murder had taken place. He had a key to the apartment. He said that if he'd wanted to steal from Nitribitt, then he could have walked into her apartment at any time. When Pohlmann realised that he was the main suspect, he threatened to release the names of some of the rich and powerful to the press. This threat did not intimidate the police. He was charged with her murder. If you'd like to hear Heinz Wolf talk about the murder investigation and the suspicion around Heinz Pohlmann, the ARD archive has an interview with him from January 1958, and the link is provided below. Pohlmann's defense attorney was Alfred Seidel. Regular visitors to this channel will have heard his name before. Alfred Seidel was a defense lawyer in the Nuremberg trials. In the trial of the major war criminals before the International Military Tribunal, he defended Hans Frank and Rudolf Hess, and later he campaigned for the release of Hess until the day Hess committed suicide. Frank got the death penalty and Hess life imprisonment. In the Wilhelmstrasse trial, he was the defense attorney for the former Reich Minister and head of the State Chancellery, Heinz Heinrich Lammers. He got 20 years. In the so-called Pohl trial, the United States of America versus Oswald Pohl et al., he defended Oswald Pohl, the lead defendant. Pohl got the death sentence. In the Nuremberg doctors trial, United States of America versus Karl Brandt et al., he defended Fritz Fischer, Karl Gebhardt, and Herta Oberhäuser. I did a 3-part documentary on her life in 2023. Fischer got 15 years, Gebhardt the death sentence, and Oberhäuser 20 years. In the I.G. Farben trial, he defended Walter Dorfeld, who got 8 years. He also represented Ilse Koch, known as the Witch of Buchenwald, and she got a life sentence, the maximum penalty then available in West Germany. In the civil case brought by the former forced labourer Norbert Wollheim against I.G. Farben from 1951 to 1957, the first test case brought by a forced labourer for damages against a German industrial company, he represented the defendant as a lawyer. Seidel's client was ordered by the court to pay the victim 10,000 Deutschmarks in damages. Seidel also defended Nazi perpetrators in later criminal cases before German regional courts, such as Hermann Fischer, a doctor at the Flossenburg concentration camp who was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment for 40 counts of aiding and abetting murder. Seidel later became Bavarian Minister of the Interior and published literature which attempted to whitewash Nazi crimes. Seidel claimed a number of inconsistencies with the police story, including the time of death. He pointed out that the heating in the apartment could have kept the body warm. I don't know how realistic that is, but there is an episode of Columbo with Faye Dunaway where that happens. If there are any morticians watching, perhaps you would like to comment. Seidel established an alibi for his client through witness statements that the accused had been seen on Gross Eichenheimer Straße after the time of death assumed by the investigators. In the opinion of the jury, the defendant was not guilty. Despite the evidence pointing the other way, the public prosecutor's office waived an appeal. The lead prosecutor was Heinz Heinrich Anton Wolf. Now, why would he do that? Whereas Alfred Seidel defended Nazis and was somewhat sympathetic to the ideology of National Socialism, he had an unblemished war record. Not so Heinz Wolf. He was a criminal. I've done a longer video on him and another one on his boss, Kurt Boder. These two were responsible for hundreds of death sentences given to opponents of the National Socialist regime in rigged kangaroo courts over which they presided in occupied Danzig. Both had been able to wangle their way back into the West German justice system after the war. If there was anyone capable of pulling off a cover-up, it was Wolf. It would seem that Wolf was informed about a planned deal with the suspect Heinz Bollmann, who was not supposed to reveal the name of Harold von Bohlen und Halbach as an acquaintance of the victim to the press. Wolf had been part of the team led by Otto Kranzbuller, which had defended the brother of Harold von Bohlen und Halbach at Nuremberg. Many years later, a journalist at Quick did get a hold of the name of Harold von Bohlen und Halbach, and the family ended up forking out a lot of cash to stop a scandal. The 2013 rediscovery of documents did show that the Krupp family heir had known the victim. However, by this time he was no longer alive. Harold Georg Wilhelm von Bohlen und Halbach was born on the 30th of May 1916. During the Second World War, von Bohlen und Halbach served as a first lieutenant and adjutant to an artillery general in Romania. After the coup d'etat in Romania in 1944, he was taken prisoner by the Soviets, although he was initially able to conceal his identity. After his identity was discovered, von Bohlen und Halbach was immediately taken to a prison for political prisoners in Moscow. Although he had nothing to do directly with the Krupp company, he was sentenced to 25 years in a labour camp. In the verdict, he was accused of, amongst other things, receiving Adolf Hitler and other Nazi bigwigs in his house. He was also accused of spying in Romania. Von Bohlen and Halbach had to work in an iron ore mine near Sverdlovsk for 5 years and was repeatedly subject to interrogations. At the beginning of the 1950s, his brother Alfred, who had been convicted in the Krupp trial, was obliged, after his early release from Landsberg war crimes prison, to pay Harold and his 3 other surviving siblings, as well as the son of his brother Klaus, who had died in 1940, a settlement of 10 million marks each. This would have made Harold von Bohlen one of the richest German bachelors and probably the richest person in Soviet captivity. He was one of the last German prisoners to be released by the Soviet Union. Given the circumstances of 11 years of Soviet captivity, I think it's understandable that Rosemarie Nitribitt was able to entangle him in her web so quickly after his release. This photograph was taken of him in her flat. Her body was later found next to the chair he is sitting on. He died on the 6th of November 1983 at the age of 67. Hans Christian Pollmann died in Munich in 1990. Harold Quandt, who once invited Rosemarie Nitribitt to his wife's birthday party, died on the 22nd of September 1967 in a plane crash near Cuneo, Italy. Ernst Wilhelm Sachs was killed in an avalanche near Val d'Isère, France, on the 11th of April 1977, aged 47. His brother, Fritz Gunther Sachs, died in Gstaad, Switzerland on the 6th of May 2011, aged 78. Joe the dog died in Frankfurt in 1966. The public prosecutor and Nazi-era criminal Heinz Heinrich Anton Wolf died on the 1st of October 1984 in Limburg at the age of 76, with his crimes unpunished, but now not forgotten. I am not a conspiracy theorist. However, I would suggest to you that the former judicial murderer in the occupied free city of Danzig could have been involved in covering up for the rich and famous. This is a very well-known case in Germany, and I'm sure that there will be people who see this video who will know more about it than I do, so I would welcome their comments. I came across it somewhat indirectly. I spend a lot of time in Gdansk. I'm there nearly every July and August, and there are a lot of videos on this site devoted to the history of that city and in particular what happened there during the Second World War. After all, this is the place where that war broke out. Whilst researching the Nazi judicial murderer in occupied Danzig, Kurt Boder, the man who prosecuted in a kangaroo court the defenders of the Polish post office in that city, I came across the man who gave him a letter of recommendation which effectively restarted his career. That was Heinz Wolf. Whilst looking at the career of Heinz Wolf, I came across the murder of Rosemarie Nitribitt. I hope you found this interesting. I upload every Tuesday and every Friday at 2000 hours Central European Time. I'm based in Poland and Germany and thus can give original researched history from here. My specialization is in material relating to the Third Reich and in particular the Holocaust. Therefore, you might want to subscribe and ring the bell. For the moment, all the best from me. Bye for now.